Hi, I'm Salvation, and in this video I want to talk about endgame bosses, maps and balance between skills for the most part. Balance is a topic that is brought up quite often in PoE and it's really hard to discuss properly in my opinion. This also refers a bit to the video I made some time ago talking about different skill levels and the impact on PoE. If you did not see it, you might want to check it out. It's linked in the top right corner and in the video description. To me, this discussion has to be based on the current level of endgame content and how monster life and damage is in those encounters. On one hand we have Guardians, the Shaper and Theory, and on the other hand we have normal red maps that make up the most part of the endgame gameplay. I would argue that the normal red maps are balanced pretty well regarding different skills. The problem in my opinion is that they are balanced in a way that most skills and builds don't have any problem face rolling the content in a pace that basically negates it as engaging content. Yes, there are occasionally hard moments where there is a combination of map mods, bloodline packs and a hard base monster, but for the most part even tier 15 maps don't provide any more challenge than a tier 5 map at the appropriate level. And this goes on even in tier 16, at least until you arrive at the boss. The Guardians are pretty well designed bosses in my opinion, but the levels of damage and health they present to the player are so out of line with everything else in this game that it's hard to believe when you fight them for the first time. The same thing applies to Shaper and to some extent to Theory. The difference in health between tier 15 bosses and those tier 16 plus bosses is like a giant cliff with no content in the game acting as a bridge between it. And this is the core of the problem in my opinion. How would anyone go about balancing even a single skill or build to not completely face roll tier 15 and below content while still having a chance in Guardians and Shaper? Part of the problem is also that there is not much growth in player power at this level. The few skill points you gain from level 91 to 100 won't provide enough growth and power to bridge the gap between tier 15 and tier 16 content. There are no high tier weapons for that level. You could have a mirrored weapon at level 70, still the content goes up to level 82 and has this strange jump in difficulty for those 6 bosses. So what is balanced? Is it balanced to have a good time in tier 15 content and really struggle with the Guardians and Shaper? Or is it finding no challenge whatsoever in tier 15 and killing Guardians pretty quick? In my opinion it's impossible to balance different skills for the gap in power that PoE currently presents in its high-end content, without providing different means to upgrade the power of your character. I don't think high weapon bases with more damage would be a good solution. I think that the divide between tier 15 and tier 16 plus content would need to be lowered to have a better baseline. And don't get me wrong, I'm not asking for the Guardians and the Shaper nerfed down to the honestly pathetic level of some of the tier 15 bosses. I would think that it's more appropriate to bring them down a little notch while raising the difficulty of the tier 11 to tier 15 content quite a bit. Currently it seems like it's too much of a question of the base skill and damage type that you choose if you can beat the 6 endgame bosses or not. The little details in the skill tree or itemization don't matter enough. If you have chosen the wrong skill, you are simply out of luck. No opal ring will bring the damage of a pure lightning arc up to the level to beat the Guardians if it could not do them before without having the ring. Not having an essence crafted chaos damage ring will not hinder a poison barrage to just face roll the Minotaur. And this is indeed the next topic, poison and burn. If we look at possible damage types, it's pretty clear that fire, chaos and physical are pretty different from other damage types at the moment because they have access to strong damage over time effects and thus to strong double dipping damage. I don't think it's inherently a problem. The problem is that the base damage of weapons and spells does not seem to be balanced around this. I also don't think it would be a good idea to balance the base damage of Firestorm around being converted to chaos and poison. But a call has to be made to either balance skill around the ability to deliver the dots, as strong as they currently are, or cutting down the power of said dots. If the dots remain as they are, I think that lightning and cold based spells and weapons would need an upgrade in their base damage to compensate for the fact that they can't cause these dots. Of course, this would again run into problems with conversion, as it's pretty simple to convert any cold spell to pure fire damage, and even lightning can be fully converted to fire. Thinking about it, I'd say that dots as strong as we currently have them are impossible to balance for if you want to keep the ability somewhat viable without using the dot and keep the ability to convert damage types to others. And in my opinion, it's somewhat important to not force every skill into using the dot associated with it. PoE offers many possible builds and options for builds, balancing it in a way that every physical build has to use poison and every elemental build has to use burn would not be satisfying for anyone. A solution to this would be giving the abilities inherent bonuses to the dots while nerfing the baseline. They already did this design on Viper Strike. The skill has an upgraded version of poison built in, with longer lasting stacks. Why not do the same for burn on Flame Blast and other skills that are intended to be used for it, while nerfing the baseline burn damage for everything else? This way they could balance the damage of other skills better, as they would not end up with it being better if converted to fire for the burn. I'm looking at you, Vortex. All this would probably don't even be needed if they would cut down the modifiers that do double dip. It's okay and logical that chaos damage, fire damage and elemental damage double dip and poison and ignites, but mine, trap, totem, area and projectile damage are just too much. The poison may be caused by an area skill, but it's really hard to argue why the resulting poison that is on a single monster and can't damage any other monsters would inherit the area damage tag to double dip on area modifiers. The problem with dots is already pretty well known, and I think GGG is well aware of it and will present a solution or a rework with the next big expansion. The problem I first talked about, the big gap in power between tier 15 and tier 16, isn't something I heard much talk about. In my opinion, GGG also contributed a lot to this being a problem for a wider player base, when they made the Shaper and the Guardians baseline content, as in making Zana give a quest to kill them, and putting them in the normal map progression. Atziri and Über-Atziri were never shoved into the face of players by the game. They are not involved in the questline and you can't access them basically on accident by just playing the maps you have. I almost never heard anyone complain about Über-Atziri being too hard, and I think this is a direct result of this, as getting to Über was never on accident or seen as normal progression. It stood outside of everything else and was some special boss that some builds could beat and others could not, and that was okay for most of the player base, at least that is how I perceived it in the pre-Atlas era. But now it is like it is, the Shaper is just a quest boss and players expect to beat him, making it a pretty bad situation if only certain skills can pull this off. I hope all this ranting made some sense in the end and maybe gave you some food for further thoughts. If it did, feel free to like and subscribe and share your thoughts about this topic in the comments. I am Salvation, see you in my next video.